I am Terry Chan. Time of presentation is 8:30 on February 19th, 2022, room number 41. And they don't need the name of the presentation, so I'll skip that. So glad all of you are here. We want to get started. I was sharing earlier that I have so much stuff to share with you today that it ought to be maybe 2 sessions, but feel free to stop me as we go. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to have conversation. I value that very much. I almost did not make it here this morning. Yeah, I got up extra early, packed all my bags, went and had some breakfast, waited for the shuttle, and I didn't recognize the shuttle. Right, and there were other people, and it left. I walked up to it, and it was a small van, and it left. And so I decided to try Uber, and it said 17-minute wait. And I said, forget it, I'm going to walk. So I started walking, and then realized as I was walking, it's like 4 miles away from my hotel. So I do the American thing, right? No way. A truck stopped for me. Okay, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, thanks. We're driving along. I tell them where I'm going, and I said, well, thank you so much for picking me up and driving me, and I don't know if it's Phoenix or something unusual, but aren't you afraid, like some stranger, or maybe I'm like a serial killer or something? And guy says, I'm not worried about this at all. I mean, what are the odds of having 2 serial killers in the same truck? But I made it anyway. Thank God I'm here. So. Yeah, so I made it anyway. But hitchhiking is not my thing, but it was all good. So let's just have a word of prayer today. Thank you, Lord, for this new day that you have brought us here safely. We pray especially for John Hine, who has come down with COVID and not able to attend today. Lord, continue to grant to him healing. Lord, continue to bless this day and all who are traveling, and that you will grant them safety. Bless our time and our conversation today. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay.
John Hine, one of your assistants, or somebody that's been here?
Someone who registered for the class and then messaged me and said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not able to come at all because of coming down with COVID. So he said he joined the COVID club.
Is he out of town or in town?
He's not here at all. So
He's not in Phoenix.
I don't know where he's from, but he's not at the conference. That's all I know.
The conference the last 2 days.
No, he messaged me before the conference even started, so that was the case. So, okay.
Christ for All Nations, a Lutheran church, or is it a generic church?
It is a Lutheran church, Missouri Synod congregation. So, yes, we are Lutheran.
Cool.
Yeah. So here we go. Maybe could you hit maybe one of the lights? You might be able to see the boards. Oh, all the lights. Okay. Yeah, that's much better. Okay. So again, feel free to stop and have some conversation about some different things. We can jump around. You have an outline that we're kind of following. It's maybe a little bit different from exactly what I prepared a week ago, but it's all good. So the course session description you've read, so I won't need to go through that. And what I like to do is just get started and ask some basic questions and just what are some of your thoughts? And there's a couple of people who would like to share. Feel free to chime in. So why are you interested in this topic? Thank you.
This week. So this week, the scripture that our congregation's been spending time with is Revelation 7
Oh.
9 to 12.
Yes.
And as I look at it, I mean, that's the church. The church is people from every nation, language, and tribe. That's God's people.
Right.
I looked at our church, and our church doesn't look like that. I mean, in little pieces it does, but overall, you know, when you look at the sea of people, it's
Okay.
that's not how you describe it, you know. So there's something that I just think it's the Lord's will for us to love all people from every nation.
Excellent. So there's that need. Others, why are you here? Yes.
It excites me to know that when we're in heaven, nobody's going to know any different about skin color or language barrier or anything. We're just going to all be in heaven praising God together.
Where there's no sin, no division, no pain.
And nobody cares
And
about that.
yeah,
It's a non-thing.
Right,
And
right.
so why can't we give that here on earth?
Right.
And like he said,
Yeah.
it's like you look at the sea of faces and it's like, that's not what heaven's going to look like. And I want to make our church look like what heaven's going to look like.
Right. Excellent. Others, yes.
I think that's the whole scripture. You see the whole picture about God reaching out to all the multi. Hey, there you go, to everybody. And
Yes.
I think, especially when we're worshiping the first evening.
Yes.
I see in the front, you know, all the different cultures. And
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Spice to the dinner.
Right. Okay. Yes.
I oversee Wells World Missions in Asia. And
Oh, okay.
as we try to set up not only seminary and other training, we want to have that over to indigenous leadership.
Right.
Some of the challenges that we face.
Okay. Yes. That is very key. That will come up. This whole leadership concept. Okay. So those are some of the questions, and your ministry context might be very different. Some of you might be involved in a local congregation. Some of you are maybe involved with campus ministries or teaching. So your context is important. It might be different for each person here. And your role might be different, and that's important to recognize as well. So what about intercultural experiences? A couple of people can share what they've been doing. Yes?
Well, I mean, I wasn't really in ministry or anything. I was in 6th and 7th grade, but my family lived in China for a while.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so that, hi Kathy. So that,
You know everybody.
Not yet.
So that kind of started me going on like the mission mindset and being like a missionary overseas and stuff.
Right.
That's kind of why I'm here.
Okay. Good. So so you have some experiences overseas and that dynamic. Okay, good. Yes.
I actually teach at one of the largest African-American, well, I'm not a teacher, I'm a teacher's aide, at one of the largest African-American schools in Sinton,
Oh, really? Where is that?
Salem Blackjack, which is North St. Louis County.
North St. Louis County.
The population of the student body is 100% African-American, but there's only one school family in the whole school.
Wow.
So it's
Okay.
a definite mission field.
Hello, neighbor. I live about 1 mile from here.
I know you.
You know everybody.
Not yet.
Okay, so we'll talk about some challenges, what has been successful, what will be helpful for you, and so on. So I want to start out by just talking in the first couple of sections on culture and to get a little foundation on that. So, oops, wrong way. So what is enculturation, assimilation, and acculturation? And so enculturation is simply the culture in which you grow up in. It is the culture you learn from your environment. You are able to naturally absorb these things. That's part of your culture. And so inculturation, you can see here that it can be taught in your family by your relatives and so on. You learn these things naturally in a very non-threatening way. It can also happen in a school environment, education and the like. There's also, and so enculturation is the process by which an individual learns about his or her own culture. That's enculturation. Then some experiences of that, examples would be Christian parents who are teaching their kids how to pray, the Lord's Prayer. That's enculturation. An American mother teaching her child how to use fork and knife. An Asian family, how to use chopsticks, right? I do not recall ever being taught how to use chopsticks, but I know how to use chopsticks. Left hand, right hand. I even played chopsticks with a pair of chopsticks one time for a talent show. Okay, or with one hand, you know, yeah, you know how you play chopsticks.
I know, I was thinking that you used a chopstick to play chopsticks.
I did. That was my talent for a talent show. Yeah, that was. So that's enculturation. So no, you don't remember ever being taught how to use a spoon, right? So that's just an example of enculturation. So an Asian child learning to remove their shoes when entering home. No, that's just what you do. That's why if you check my closet, I only have slip-on shoes. Well, I have one pair of laces, but I just don't do that because I'm not going to bend down, tie and untie my shoes. Wherever I go, I'm taking those off. Even these slip-on sneakers, right? So that's enculturation. Assimilation. Assimilation is a little different. Assimilation, is that a good word or a bad word?
Could be either way.
It could be either way, really. Right? In some circles, assimilation is viewed as when an ethnic minority has to give up their own culture in order to assimilate into that majority culture. So they kind of have to lose themselves a little bit. So they're no longer who they are, but they have to become something different. They're needing to assimilate. And sometimes we talk about the melting pot theory. You know, all the people, all the cultures come together. We blend it all. You know, all the potato and all the carrots. We all kind of just melt into this one pot, and we're all the same. And sometimes, from that view of assimilation, it can be quite challenging. It can be quite difficult for families and like. Then there's acculturation. And that's a process by which an individual or group adopts the practices and values of one culture while still retaining their own. And so they're learning about this culture, but they don't have to give up their own culture. They're not trying to change who they are. That's acculturation. And so it's more like a salad bowl, right? This culture with individuality. So here's a picture of that. I like this diagram. The melting pot says you should be like me. You have to fit in. So you have a sense of loss of your customs and your culture and your self-identity. Whereas acculturation, it's okay to be who you are. You can belong in that pot. You can be that salad. You want to taste every item in that bowl, and it's all good. And so that's kind of the difference between the two. And so there are differences between acculturation and assimilation. There are things that are similar between the two. Both times the minority culture is adopting the majority culture, but in a way that is different. The circumstances are different. The differences between acculturation and assimilation is evident also, and that is sometimes that assimilation can be forceful. You have to assimilate. If you want to do certain things, you have to learn the language. If you want to do certain things to succeed, it can be very stressful. But on the other hand, acculturation is a little more gradual. It's not necessarily forced upon you. You can go ahead and feel more comfortable being who you are, and as you acculturate, it is more natural. It's not something forced on you.
Is there a third option between where, when you connect with people of other cultures, then you learn from that culture, and so your own culture begins to adjust, and hopefully, so when there's a sharing, and you're retaining your own culture, but you're also learning from the other culture, so you in some ways, even in the maybe there's a stew in between where there is some kind of you're influenced by the other ingredients, but you still retain, you're still a potato or a carrot or whatever.
Right. So the question is there an in-between?
Is there an in-between thing?
I'm sure there is. The acculturation is a little more gradual, usually, but assimilation can be very gradual as well. And so it's kind of a continuum, how acculturated or how assimilated you are in that. So definitely there is an in-between. I don't know of a specific term for it necessarily, but the assimilation, sometimes I'm thinking maybe it's more about inclusion. Is that what we really mean? So when we are working with people from a different culture, are we just trying to make them like us, or are we trying to welcome them among us? That's a difference in approach. And so I'm thinking maybe inclusion is what we really mean or intend when we are saying to people, we want them to assimilate. And so assimilation, you can see from this diagram, an individual is treated as an insider in the work group or whatever your setting is when he or she conforms to the dominant culture, the norms, and downplays their own uniqueness. That's assimilation going in one direction. Whereas inclusion simply says, whoever you are, you're treated as you belong. You're treated as an insider. You're treated and encouraged to be who you are and retain your uniqueness within that group. And so that's more of the inclusion. And this is an interesting diagram. It talks about belongingness and the values of those different parts. And you can look through this kind of a chart and begin to understand more about assimilation, inclusion, exclusion, differentiation. So those are all important parts of a culture that we can learn. I want to go on to a next section of culture also and talk about intercultural, multicultural, cross-cultural, intercultural, and transcultural, and what do those all mean and why are they important? This is to give you just a little more foundation to understand yourself and the people you are engaging with. So I did doing some research and came across a person named Refsum, and he was describing more something about music, and it was the distinction and progression of disciplinarities. And I said, well, okay, this looks interesting because I think it can apply to culture. So I basically just substituted the word and stuck in culture and made my own chart using his stuff. Okay, so what is the distinction and progression of cultures? And so first one is intracultural. That's working within a single culture. That is mainly then a homogeneous kind of setting. Right? A single culture mostly, intracultural. The next one is multicultural. People from different cultures working together, each drawing on their cultural knowledge. It's a little bit like that salad bowl. Cross-cultural. Viewing one culture from the perspective of another. Oftentimes people with cross-cultural, they're crossing into a culture, but then they cross back out at the end of the day. You can cross into an African American culture at your school, 100% African American, and then you leave and you leave that culture again. So that cross culture. So you can enter a culture, you can come out of that culture as well. Intercultural, integrating that knowledge and methods from different cultures, using things, and it all kind of synthesizes together. And you can see how that diagram, you can see it's all kind of mixing together. And then transcultural, it's going beyond culture and almost seeing no culture. And then it kind of circles back to being intercultural again. So those are some perspectives on how we can view culture and what your particular setting might be. Thoughts, comments on that?
So transcultural is kind of like that melting pot, but it's not a one generation. You must come to this point by yourself right now, do it. It's just like our entire community has done this over a long period of time. Whereas we are now one culture, but with all the different things.
In a sense, yes, it goes you're going beyond culture. You're able to relate on a level that is not so culture specific anymore, right? So in that sense, yes.
I was thinking, when you were asked, do you have family here, you said, yeah, brothers and sisters. That was transcultural, right?
Yes, that's a great example. Thank you for that. Yes.
Just along with the idea of the transcultural, thinking about, like, in El Paso, Texas, like, for instance, where you have essentially one city just separated by an arbitrary border, that more or less what's happened, it seems like, is that basically the culture of the city, of the two cities, is more or less the same culture. It just happens to be one's the U.S., one's Mexico.
Yeah.
Kind of what you're talking about, the idea of
Sure.
that you go to the store and pretty much everybody's bilingual.
It's no border, no boundaries necessarily. Okay, yes.
Is there an ideal that you're working towards, or is it just depends on the context and what you're trying to?
It's just understanding that these are the dynamics, and you might find yourselves in different places of that. And understanding that, it's not necessarily one is better than the other, but these are just some dynamics that exist. And recognizing it can be helpful, and the name of this session is Intercultural Ministry, and so we're looking at specifically how are we engaging with each other, and that's what that diagram is showing, engaging each other. So, and there's some value in that, because it's going to be important to understand what that is like. Okay, so if you want to learn more about cultures, there's some research by a man named Halstead, and a couple years ago I did a session here on how to exegete a culture, and we talked about, there's so many different dynamics, but we talked about, at that time, things like context, power distance, individualism versus collectivism, and ambiguity, and those are all different dynamics of culture. And so, an example of power distance would be, in some cultures, it is you could be high power distance or low power distance, and power distance would be like, if you come from a high power distance, you're much more respectful. You address everyone by title. Low power distance, there's a short gap between the two. And so everyone's the same. We all go by our first name. There's no differentiation about that. And so that's some distinction. And so one example is two pastors from different cultures. One pastor walked into the other pastor's office. The one pastor in the office had his feet up on the table with showing the soles of his shoes. And the other pastor, being a high power distance pastor, felt that was extremely offensive. He was not showing any respect to him by having his feet up on the table when he walked in. Whereas the other one was, let's just kick back, come on in, throw your feet up on the table too, right? So one was saying, hey, come on in. The other was saying, what are you doing, right? So that's the cultural dynamics that are involved there. Okay, so now it comes to in this next section, which is why. Okay, and that's so important. That's why I started the conversation with the question, why? Okay, what are some wrong reasons to reach a culture than your own? And maybe think about maybe a congregational setting or some ministry setting. What are some wrong reasons?
Because we won't survive.
Because we won't survive.
We want you to be like us.
Want you to be like us.
You have the right answers. And you have the wrong answers.
We have the right answers. Well, when it comes to Jesus, maybe, yeah. Yeah. So what are wrong reasons for reaching?
More giving units in the church.
More giving units in the church. There we go. Think of any others? How about, we need more people in the church. That's why we ought to reach out to them. Our church is dying. Let's do that. Our church is empty. Maybe our community is changing. Let's reach out to the people. We need the rent. Let's rent out our space to some other cultural group that needs it. The Koreans actually use that as a mission model. From their perspective, they want to do that. But they're already Christians. We're talking mostly about reaching a culture who is not yet Christian. That's from my perspective. Okay. The pastor says we have to do it, right? Oh, that's the wrong reason. List other wrong reasons. Okay, so you guys share some of those already. Okay, so what are some common excuses that we don't do it? What excuse do we have?
Language.
I don't speak the language, or they don't speak my language. Which one is it? Okay, others.
I'm uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable in
Just doing it.
in doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of like, evangelism, right? Yeah.
Scary word.
I know. It's like you have to whisper it.
And there's nobody different than us near us. That's a big thing, because even when there are, sometimes we don't see the people around us because we're so used to seeing the people that we're used to seeing, that we don't even see who's in our neighborhood.
Right. Your own circle of influence, your circles, your social circles, right?
We don't have any friends that aren't like us, so how would we get people to our church? How would we do that?
Yeah. Right. Okay.
One of the things I hear often is there are illegals and there are consumers.
Oh.
And I've been in the Anglo community in church and trying to merge the two churches, and that was the biggest obstacle. There are illegals and they don't pay taxes, and they're consumers. It's like,
And to be good Christians, we cannot engage with people doing something illegal. Right? Well, I mean, you guys don't speed ever, right? Common reasons, common excuses we don't reach out to a culture other than our own. We need an ethnic pastor first, because it's the pastor's job to reach out to everyone. So until some ethnic pastor happens to come along, and not only an ethnic pastor, they have to be a Lutheran ethnic pastor. You know how many ethnic Lutheran pastors are in our Missouri Synod?
I don't know, how many?
I'm Norwegian. Does that say it?
The correct answer is 6,000, all of us. Yeah. Okay, so that was a trick question. Yes, or there is no ethnic pastor available. Very similar. Okay, we don't speak the language, that came up. We don't have the funds to pay for someone. or to support a ministry, so it's all about the money. Let another church do it. They're more equipped to do it. Or another church is already doing it. Why should we duplicate a ministry to some other people? Okay. It's the pastor's job to do it. I think I said that before. That's a repetitive excuse. And it's the synod or district's job to do it. I should put it's the seminary's job to do it.
You could do that. I won't agree with you. I think a bigger one is that we don't think we have to do it. All we have to do is be faithful in word and sacrament, and the Holy Spirit will do it.
Exactly, yes.
So my problem, just to add some dynamic,
Yes.
is I often have a group of ethnic groups that want to become Lutheran.
Uh-huh.
My job is to try to get churches to let them in.
Wow, yeah.
And we are rejected more often
Really?
by churches that we don't. We cannot comply. We don't want to bring this. It's usually a Roma, so
Yeah.
or into the church.
Mm.
You know, sorry, go be warm, go in peace.
Mm.
I mean, it's just offensive in some places.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
So that's a major problem from what I come across.
Just
But you know, it's not necessarily just the pastor.
no, it's
Because the
everybody.
pastor might be very welcoming, but the thing is that sometimes the congregation is so, well, these are my buddies that I grew up with, and they've been part of our church the whole time, but these people are interlopers. They're coming into our church that we've been established here for all these years, and why should we let anybody else into our church?
churches have become
Thoughts.
churches have become very exclusive, right? We talk about membership. No, the only other place I hear about membership is like the country club, the golf club, or so, right? Otherwise, you don't really hear about membership a whole lot. Gym membership, I have one, but I never go, right? So, yeah.
But I
I
think
wonder
also
if sometimes it's not as you know, it's really easy to look and say, you know, people don't want to do that because of bad reasons. But sometimes people just don't know, you know, even how to open up their world to other people. Don't know how to be hospitable to people that are different than them. It's not that they're in theory opposed to it as much as just in practice, it's just outside of their world.
Mm-hmm. How do we learn that? Yes.
And that was my job in Arkansas and Texas to join the two cultures, or in my context, you know, Hispanic community and the Anglos. And it's a process. It's not just, you're a Christian, you should do this. Of course, both sides have fear. The reason they're stopping that is because of fear. But once you learn about the culture, know the difference. One time I had to put a screen in a traditional setting. Oh man, everybody, that you don't put that screen in there. It's like, what is this? No pictures in the church, no. So little by little, I joined the two groups, and they were welders. One side didn't speak English, the other side didn't speak Spanish, but they were making some jokes somehow. They were laughing.
Mm.
That person opened the door for everybody else. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and after that, they were eating together after church in the fellowship hall. So I think this is a process to learn this. I've been here for
Mhm.
2 years from Colombia,
Mm.
and I'm all over the place now, assimilated. I'm more whatever. I'm more American than Colombian now. But I
Mm.
think it's just a process, you know.
Right.
And as ourselves, we're in the process of becoming more like Christ.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Common excuses. There's more. The ethnic population too small. I think you mentioned that. They might outnumber us.
Then you're not in charge.
That very church I talked about, the pastor's feet. That was their major conflict. The ethnic ministry outgrew the Anglo congregation, and they became very antagonistic because of that.
Sorry, can I tell you?
Yes, please.
I went to Texas, and this church was just Anglo farmers. It was only like 10, 12. They all paid. They weren't bringing the money. I mean, thousands of dollars a month.
Mm.
And I said, well, can I do something in Spanish? Sure. So I went on Friday, knocked on doors in the whole neighborhood. I had 57 people. You know
Wow.
what they say? We cannot have this. They will have numbers. Now they're begging me to come back. It's only have 5 after COVID.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. But that's you know. A sense of insecurities that can lose control, right? And that can be threatening.
Because control is threatening, because we all have to be in control.
Yeah,
And ultimately.
exactly. So even if you let them in, even if you reach out to a culture other than your own, you have restrictions. Like you can come use our church, but who owns the kitchen? Do they get to use the kitchen? Do they complain about the smell of Korean kimchi or what? I like kimchi, but I actually had a classmate growing up named Kimchi, and yeah, that is not a joke. And that was before I knew what kimchi was, so it didn't mean anything back then. And he was a guy. His name was Kim, which I thought was kind of strange. But anyway, what else? Do we count them as our members, or do they have their own church? Right? Who gets credit? Okay, those are a bunch of excuses why we might not want to reach out to a culture other than your own, in more of a congregational context. Okay, the reasons why we reach out to a culture other than our own. I think the Bible, you've shared already early on, the Bible is really speaking to you guys. The Bible wants the blessing of faith and salvation for all people. The 4 G's. I have an iPhone, but not a new enough iPhone to get the 5G service. So I'm stuck on 4G. Okay, but my 4Gs are a little different, right? My 4Gs are, why? No, it's God's heart. God wants us to do this. God wants to reach all people. And so 1 Timothy says, this is good and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. For there is one God and there is one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all, which is the testimony given at the proper time. That's God's heart. He's the one who is wanting to reach people. He wants to reach them through us and through our opportunities. Next G, the Great Commission. You know that. You could probably recite it. Go and make disciples of all nations, all ethnic groups. Third G, the Great Commandment. Love the Lord your God. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's our calling. That's who we are. Fourth G, the great multitude in heaven that you guys already mentioned from Revelation 7. Right? I look and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and people and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and the Lamb. That's become such a powerful passage for us to recognize that heaven is not going to look like some of our congregations. It's going to be much more inclusive of everyone from every nation. Okay, so why not reach a culture than your own? No more excuses, right? You thought about why and so on. Now we're willing to say, now we know the right reasons why. We can't make excuses. We don't have to make excuses because the Lord is going to be the one working in us. And what Jeff said is true. The Holy Spirit will work through us, and He will be the one that brings people into His kingdom. Okay. Thoughts on this section, on cultures and the whys and why nots?
The one why not that wasn't up there in my context,
Yes.
I'm hearing, is safety. I have, where I'm at, I have some major ringleaders or some things that come in.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean by that?
So safety, like I have drug dealers, I have their kids are part of my youth ministry. That's the parents, Anglo churches. Whoa, what's this about? You know, that's back to I've had to tell some them like you can't be caring. You know, like, you can't. You gotta go. Or do what you gotta do with it, but you come back. Aspect of things. It's not now. I'm painting a grim picture. That's not every Sunday. That's not every week. That's not every Wednesday or Tuesday or whatnot. But things happen. Safety in the sense that I dropped off to my teenagers last Sunday, and they told me the house next to them as I was driving home was shot up last night.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm like, and to the point where they're like, their parents don't want them walking right now either. So I'm not saying that's a reason not to. It's a concern within the context where I'm serving in a multicultural aspect of things.
Yeah.
And we've done things to improve safety, security, and
Right.
et cetera. So I'm not saying it, but that could come up.
Yes.
Why are you
Yes.
here so late? It's 10 o'clock at night. Well, because by the time I get over, not on purpose. It's supposed to be about 8. But everybody wanted to stay around and have dinner together or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay.
Yesterday I was in the session talking about reaching out to Afghani folks coming over.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought up some people are concerned about what if they're terrorists or that kind of thing. He says it's very unlikely, but those kind of fears, it's the same kind of thing. You're afraid of people you don't know sometimes.
Okay. Yeah.
This reminds me of how church was when I first moved here. Women were not allowed to speak in the voters' meeting.
Right.
Women were not allowed to do any Bible readings. The pastor had to open LWML, and on and on.
On and on. Okay. Thank you guys for your sharing.
Oh, and my name had the wrong ending.
Oh, okay.
Even if I was baptized as a baby, Missouri Synod.
Yeah.
I know.
The next session is the shift from homogeneity to diversity. Right, being homogeneous, all the same. How do we go from that to more diversity? And so here's a chart, a diagram, and I'm going to break that down a little bit more. Thank you for that. That made me more helpful. So the shift, if you want to make that shift for yourself or for a congregation, a ministry setting for yourself, it starts with those Bible verses we just read. That there is a spiritual recognition in your own heart that you are aligning with what God desires. Once you have that needs to be the reason why. That needs to be the inspiration for why you are wanting to reach a culture other than your own. Not just because it's the trendy thing to do, the right reason, wrong reason. It's because God's spoken to your heart and He wants, He's empowering and enabling and motivating you to do that. Once that happens, and that can be a gradual thing. That can be something that grows over time. That can be something that it could be something that suddenly dawns on you and you said, yeah, this is what I need to do, start right now. So it comes from God, it starts with God. And then we begin to recognize these factors. Diaspora movement, the dispersion of people, where people are moving around. The demographic diversity in your particular place. What is that like? I think Joe was sharing about how people are starting to move into his area, and so now planning ahead of time is a powerful thing to do. And then leadership development. I think that is one of the very key things, and I'll speak more about leadership development or intercultural leadership development. So that's really kind of phase one. That's how you begin to shift from homogeneity to diversity. And then the next phase is more of a life cycle stage. It's like giving birth to a child, right? My youngest daughter just gave birth, and Emma is now 2 months old. So yeah. So that's a thank you. That's a wonderful blessing. And so the life cycle, okay, is a shift. So if you take a simple life cycle, you think about, okay, if you're going to make this shift, there has to be a stage of conception. That's stage one, right? How do you do that? If you're developing a ministry, what needs to happen? What are the plans? Who's going to be involved in this? What are some of the dynamics that will be involved? And then the prenatal, again, nurturing the ideas and being prayerful. You get to a point of giving birth to this, and then there's a ministry to people from a culture other than your own. But when you reach adolescence, you know the problems that come along. You're going to hit some rough patches, and there needs to be some discipline or changes or some corrections. But hopefully at some point you reach that point of reproduction or just basically growth. Then it becomes fruitful. It becomes mature in its ministry.
And a child is rarely like you planned.
Yeah.
They all have their own.
Thank goodness. Yeah, my child is not exactly like me. Yeah. So that's one phase. That's the next phase. And then the shift to diversity. So here, this is kind of going on, and then you're going to a shift to diversity. And so you're going to have some real wonderful successes, as well as challenges, as well as learning new things and new opportunities. And that just kind of flows back and forth from there. And from that, hopefully you are bearing the fruit of demographic diversity in the congregation or in your relationships. And then it leads to then needing to have leaders, and something I call intercultural leadership development. It's a model that I'm working on developing. Okay, so I've been using that in my own present ministry, where I've been for the last 17 years. It was the merging of two traditional white English-speaking congregations. One established in 1908, one in 1925. And so they're long historical churches that were rapidly declining in its ministry. And so we merged them together, and they called me to serve as their pastor and lead missionary. And part of the process was then naming ourselves through a merger to be Christ of All Nations Lutheran Church. During that process of merging those two churches, we became a multi-ethnic church, 1/3 white, 1/3 Asian American, various Asian backgrounds, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, and 1/3 African American. And over time, that congregation has continued to grow, and then it began to decline again because of the demographics. That those two declining congregations, in 17 years, I've had 85 funerals.
85 what?
85 funerals. That's deadly. But yes.
So you have 3 different languages in how you're reaching out there, and then Church of All Nations at the top. That's the English-speaking side that brings it together?
So this is showing Christ for All Nations. So as that congregation began to decline again, even though now it's a multi-ethnic church, we see ministry not just as who we are, but who else can we reach out to? What is our sphere of influence? And so we started a food pantry ministry. It's the largest standalone food pantry in the city and county of San Francisco. Pre-COVID, 750 families individuals come by our church every Saturday to receive food. They would actually come hours beforehand to receive food because they want to be first in line. The one very entrepreneurial woman, she actually asked people to pay her to hold their spot in line, and we had to stop that. But
So
yes.
the cultural diagram
Yes.
there, and the thing is called intercultural ministry. So I'll just let you go.
Yes.
With your thing. What I'm looking for
Yes.
is 3 different languages functioning well with an English-speaking group, but all getting older. Their kids are learning English, and how are you making the jump to intercultural? Because that's the challenge I see in a lot of places.
That's right. That's right. So there's a development of a Chinese Cantonese language ministry. Then we began to sponsor an Ethiopian Amharic language ministry, and we host a Spanish language ministry. So we are now a multi-ethnic parish of multiple congregations, languages, locations, and ministries. So that's who we morphed into, or what we evolved into. And so these 3 groups really deal in 5 languages: Mandarin, Cantonese, Spanish, Amharic, and English. So it's 5 different languages on a given ministry day. So that's who they are. And we interact in different ways. We partner together. The neighborhood is very diverse, and so we invite the Spanish-speaking congregation to come and help at our food pantry, because the majority of the people in the multi-ethnic congregation do not speak Spanish. But there are Spanish-speaking people who come who we cannot communicate with. And we said, come, reach out to these people. So we work together in that way. We integrate in that manner. And with a Amharic congregation, language congregation, we also work on some projects together. One is right now a clothing collection and distribution ministry that we're having this event, and we're working with the public school to do that. So they will actually distribute these clothing to the children in the neighborhood. So that's just a picture of one example of people working together in a multi-ethnic, intercultural setting.
In San Francisco,
Yes.
how are you reaching out to transgender and gay people?
We don't have a specific ministry focus on that, but we welcome all people and we interact with them in the very same way. We have some neighbors who are part part of the LGBTQ community, but they interact with our church all the time. Matter of fact, they have taken over the gardening of our property. They love plants and stuff. And so they worked with Urban Forest, and they had some trees planted along the sidewalks, and they said, if you would go forward with the project, we will maintain them, we'll water them, we'll trim them, we'll fertilize them. And then at our church we have this hillside that's full of weeds, and they're turning it into a garden for us, and so on. So it's not a intentional ministry other than you're our neighbors, and what can we do together and make our community better. So that's our approach to reaching out to all of the groups. So diaspora, some three assumptions to that. The first, and no, 4G, now I'm talking about 3D, okay? Three assumptions. First, the diaspora is from Acts 17. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. So again, the diaspora, people moving around the world, dispersing in different places, that's really all a part of God's plan. He is the one who has set those boundaries and those times. Second D, diversity. Again, our passage from Revelation. 3D, demographic trends. The LCMS is 93% white English-speaking membership. That is recent demographic information. Does that surprise you, or that's something you already know?
I thought it would be a higher percentage, to be perfectly honest.
Seriously, thank you. I was thinking it was higher too.
Well, it actually declined from 95% from a couple of decades ago.
Is that because of death or?
I'm not sure which.
It's
Yes.
probably because most of the districts are reporting all of the growth is in brown and black churches. Church planting, mission outreach, and decline of closing of the Anglo churches.
Yeah, so that gap is shifting slightly, right? Okay. I believe the LCMS has declined from about 2.6, 2.7 million members, right? And I was shocked. The last number I saw was under 2 million.
Well, it's 1.9.
Yeah. Right, so we've lost almost 1 million members in the last 30, 40 years, something like that.
Losing about, I'd have to check my
Yeah, but
1,000 a year.
yeah, it's quite serious. The United States will become a majority-minority nation around 2040, in about 20 years. Majority-minority nation meaning there will be no majority group.
Oh, okay.
San Francisco is a majority-minority city, yes.
So you need to add another line to that. We already are a majority in the minority, in the under 21 age. It's already,
Wow.
the census is
Yes.
some of those things out. It's already a done deal.
Yes.
When those kids grow up to be 2024, that's when it'll take over the rest of the body.
2042, yep, it's coming.
The amount of non-white births
Outnumbered.
outnumbered white births in 2017, I think it was.
Yeah.
All this-
Yeah, it's already
it's a
passed.
done deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's they just right. So it's already among us, and it's just recognizing the demographic trend. Okay, and this I really enjoy this upcoming chart here. What is the most common language spoken in your state, other than English and Spanish? Do you know?
We have someone in the Board of Education in Texas. According to the research, it is Arab in
Yeah.
Texas.
Okay, take a look at that. Find your find your state, and you have a little.
I was right.
I'm old, I can't read.
I'll send it to you guys.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so
I don't speak one, but it's a common word.
Mandarin and Cantonese, Chinese language, is the largest third language of states. Look at almost all the West Coast states, all the East Coast states, and look at that line going through the Midwest. All right, that's Cantonese and Mandarin, Chinese. Okay, in that orange, and it's what is that? Purple in Nevada, Tagalog. What language is that from? Philippines. Why is that the third most spoken language?
What is Wisconsin?
Filipinos like
They are working in Las Vegas and Reno and every other hospitality industry. Yeah. 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 So those are the third most spoken language, right? We know Spanish is that's a given, right? We just kind of know what's that third most spoken language in each of these states.
Yeah, now, what are these measurements from? I mean, where are these statistics from? Who did this?
It's from these people, visual capitalists. You can get that, and I can send these to you guys as well.
I will love the slides, man.
Yeah, is that kind of cool? Okay. Yeah. Anyway, the most commonly spoken household languages. We typically operate under the assumption that most Americans speak either English or Spanish, though this might be true in the broadest sense. The U.S. is actually culturally much more diverse. Homes speak all different languages. The U.S. Census Bureau asked more than 1 million American questions. So that's based on a survey of 1 million or so. So. These are important things. This is all from the same resource article. It came with this map. So looking at non-English languages in the United States, in 2019, approximately 78%, 241 million, of the 308 million people ages 5 and older reported speaking only English at home, regardless of their nativity. The remaining 22%, 67.8 million, report speaking a language other than English at home. Nearly, what is that percentage? Nearly a third?
just over a fifth.
A fifth, just over a fifth, right? 22%, something like that. Don't speak English at home, right? Okay, so based on the data, Mandarin and Cantonese were the most common non-English, non-Spanish spoken in the U.S. More than 3.4 speakers across the country. Okay, that doesn't mean there are 3.4 million Chinese people. It's just 3.4 million who speak the language at home. Okay, so I was actually surprised by that. Okay, so we'll keep going with this as we draw closer. So diaspora ministry opportunities. No, those opportunities to reach out to people from a culture other than your own. It's in your backyards. It's in your neighborhoods. If you begin to look more intentionally, you will find many opportunities. So some strategies. I'm talking about ministry by the diaspora to ministry through, ministry by and beyond, and ministry with. And so those are kind of four stages that we do ministry. So mission to diaspora people. So who are those people coming to the U.S.? Why are they here? Who are they? Who were they? Because they do change. And where are they now? So we looked at some of those demographics, right? So who are they? New immigrants. We continue to have many new immigrants. We have migrants who come who might be here temporarily, who are workers coming across the border, who might return to their homelands. They're migrating here for periods of time. We have people who are coming just to visit, and they like it here so much they decide to stay. We have refugees from war-torn countries. Now we have big wave of Afghanis, right? So I had a person in my church who was from Iran. She became a Christian, and this was in Michigan. She went to a PhD program. She simply said, "Oh, now that I'm out of Iran, I like to go to a church." And so the church closest to her apartment on campus was a Lutheran church. So she just walked in and eventually became a Christian. And then she moved out to San Francisco, and she was so fearful, because she still had her family in Iran. She was so fearful about being a Christian that she realized she could not return, and she had to seek asylum here. And so we helped her do that process, she's got a great story to tell. Settled immigrants are also a part of this. There are people coming to the United States who are actually professional entrepreneurs. In California, you want to buy real estate. It's so hard because these professional people are coming and they're paying cash. You can't outbid them, okay? Unless you got a million or two. The average home, Fremont, what's the average cost of a house? 2.1 million.
Or about 1.9.
1.9. Okay, yeah, it goes back and forth. Yeah, and that's for like what, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath.
Yeah, my boss just sold his 3-bedroom house for 2.4 million. Wow. I would never invest there.
Yes. Okay. So there are also college students. They are also next generation people, people from the next generation. Here, so talking about generational, next generation kind of ministry, recognizing language is very important. People are still speaking the native language. That's their heart language that they can worship in, that they can speak about faith. But there's also language that is spoken and unspoken. There's verbal and nonverbal communications when we are engaged with intercultural people. And so English-speaking, bilingual, trilingual people, multilingual people, these are people who are around. So cultural enculturation and acculturation is likely to be a continuum. And I'll put a plug in here. I'm going to talk more about that in March. I'll be doing a live webinar for Mission Field USA on the topic of reaching English-speaking second-generation Asian Americans for Christ. So that's an upcoming seminar I'll do on that topic. But by continuum, I'm talking about how about the process of acculturation and assimilation. How culture is just different because you can be born and raised here and still retain many of your native cultures, right? So, for example, when you walk into your house, do you take your shoes on or off? In Asian culture, you take your shoes off. I'm both a first and a fifth generation person. If you read my profile, a first generation immigrant and a fifth generation American. But my kids are second generation and sixth generation. They still follow those same customs. Okay, so greeting children in some cultures, the children, you run up to the kids and you greet them, you go hug them and stuff. In other cultures, the children are expected to come and greet an elderly person, not the other way around. And, you know, how do you eat a bowl of rice? Well, you're shoveling, right? That's the Chinese way. You pick up your bowl and you shovel rice in to eat, right? I dated a Korean girl once. She taught me, don't you do that. Koreans do not eat their bowl of rice like Chinese. Koreans keep their bowls on the table. Okay, and they bring the rice up. Okay, so my administrative assistant is Japanese. I asked her, how do you guys eat rice? Do you bring it up to your mouth or you leave it on the table? Yeah, you put it in sushi. That's what I've been thinking, right? Yeah, you wrap it up in seaweed. That's how you eat rice, right? She said, no, we're kind of halfway. We kind of lift it up, but we don't put it to our lips or our mouth. We're kind of halfway, and then we eat it. So who knew? Okay, so that was funny. So, and you know, do you slurp your soup? Do you burp, or do you not slurp and burp? Sounds like a name for a restaurant, fast food place, right? Because in some cultures, right, what is it? You're slurping your soup, you burp, that's, excuse me, that's so impolite. Yeah, and in other cultures, you intentionally let your chef, the person who made the food, know that you love the food so much that you're slurping it. You're communicating something totally different. So depending on your cultural perspective, right, and where you are. So that is some of those dynamics. Okay, so it's generational. This ministry to these people, where are they from? So they can be very acculturated on one end. They know not to slurp in certain settings, but it's okay in other settings. Take your shoes on, take your shoes off, and so on. So become bicultural, multicultural. And so you could have people who are very assimilated or acculturated, and yet not. Yeah, so it's a continuum. And you never know until you meet that person and get to really know them and develop a relationship where they are on these things. So you can't really just say, okay, these are the people and this is how they are. We begin to stereotype them. So we need to be very individual in understanding them. And even then with working within a family, their kids may do it one way, their parents may do it another. Now, missions through the diaspora. So we know who we can reach out to. Now we want to equip them, train those people from other cultures to reach other people from their own social networks. We don't have to do it all. If we just reach one person and disciple them to reach out to their own families and so on. So that's ministry through the diaspora. And so often we're trying to reach a multitude of people. If you just reached one person, equip them to reach the others, that would be very effective. Their social networks, they know the languages, they know, so you don't need to know the language because of that. So missions by and beyond, equipping the people to reach other cultures. We all can be very ethnocentric in our lives. So what happens is that a Chinese church, they're doing mission work, and they're reaching Hispanic people in Mexico. It used to be mission work. We're going overseas. We're going to Thailand, but we're going to reach the Chinese people in Thailand. Okay, that was the mentality, very ethnocentric. Now we're saying, how can we do ministry to and by and beyond? How can the people from another culture, how can we reach them, equip them, and how do we help them reach people in the same way that they can reach beyond their own ethnic group as well. So that's, again, intercultural ministry by and beyond the diaspora, and then with diaspora. So we want to be engaged with the people. We want to do ministry together, develop those partnerships and collaboration to do so. Okay, so those are 4 stages, 4 phases, however you want to do it, but they can be a strategy in developing how you go about doing this, reaching people from a culture other than your own. Some other strategies, I think it really comes down for me, it's about relationships and about leadership. Those are 2 very key components. And something I call intercultural relational leadership development and IRLD. And it's a strategy, a model, and there are some aspects to this concept. There should be this mutual respect. It cannot be a top-down kind of relationship. Too often, that is how it is approached. We're doing you a favor by letting you come into our church. We're more than, we're doing you a favor. We're trying to reach out to you, but we're doing so from a ownership point of view. Our relationship is more of a landlord-tenant. You pay us the rent, and we'll let you use our facility, rather than a partnership together. There needs to be comparable levels of authority and responsibility. So we're talking about more of a leadership level. Okay, there has to be. If you have ethnic leaders that you're working with, it needs to be seen on an equal basis and not a top-down kind of basis. Okay, so intentional identification, recruitment, development, and deployment and placement of leaders in meaningful positions. And so, depending on your setting, if they are coming into your church and not as a separate church, they need to be included in these kind of things. And that's very true also of our church structure. We need to raise up other ethnic leaders within our church body. So this picture, it describes how a diverse mission field leads to a diverse congregation and mission leadership core, which then leads to a diverse leadership core, and it results in a diverse mission outreach, which then circles over to a diverse mission outreach. It leads to development of ecclesiastical diversity. Your church becomes diverse, and then it goes to number 4, a developed ecclesiastical diversity leads back to a diverse mission field. So it's kind of a cycle of how that goes around. Catch your shadow. See ya.
Thank you.
And then for leadership, this is a very well-known, common dynamic of how you might coach or mentor leaders. And I think this can be very effective in working with other intercultural leaders. And it works both ways in that relationship, that a person from one culture and the other are learning together about that from each step. So the idea is I do and you watch, and then we talk about that. I do and then you help me, and we talk about that experience. Now you do it, and I'll help you. You do it, and I'll watch, and we talk. And then you do it, and someone else watches. And so there's a multiplication and ongoing development of some other leaders. But from an intercultural perspective, then, you're walking together, learning about each other's culture. And then you're engaging in those cultures together. Okay, so any questions about this last section? Any thoughts or comments? Okay.
That process of, I mean, there's a period of time in each of those steps, right? So it's not.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm doing it today and then you're doing it tomorrow.
No.
We're spending some time at each stage, talking through those things and growing until moving on.
It could be many actions for each step, and sometimes you might even go back a step to work on certain things. Sure. Yes.
So I usually work with groups that are already worshiping and coming together with the LCMS or churches.
Mm-hmm.
I don't follow that because they're already got an active, functioning, dynamic culture.
Yes.
And so I have to do more watching to begin.
Yeah.
Understand why they do what they do, which usually would make sense in their culture or their
Right.
context, which have, which are neighbors.
Mm.
And working it up. The model that you put up there, I just realized, is much more assimilation and showing them how I do it so that they can become more like me by the end, and protecting how I do things.
Well,
You have
it's
to watch for that.
right, but it needs to be two ways.
It needs to be two ways, but if it starts you watching me,
Right.
and I never watch you for
Right.
how you're doing it,
Right.
then we already lose the dynamic you're looking for.
Exactly, and so that particular chart was not designed necessarily for the intercultural training, but I'm saying we can adopt that
Right.
and add that dynamic of let's do it together as we progress along the steps. But that's a great point too. Maybe you might begin at a different step and go in a slightly different route.
Well, it depends if you bring, if you're discipling and you're starting from scratch, because whether a person has a lot of cultural knowledge or, everybody has proficiencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if they're coming into the Christian faith and it's new for them, then there has to be a discipleship process in which that person grows in their faith. What I heard Jeff saying is that the people he's bringing in are already discipled. They're already growing in Christ and have, they come in at a different place on the ladder,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak.
Right.
Well, what I hear is that Jeff would now be in step E, the 1, 2, 3, the fifth step. He would be the someone watching, because he wants to see how they do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he will again go over to,
But I think it goes back to what you were saying, the relation part first. You just don't come and approach people like that. You have the relationship. And I think no matter, I believe that you have to start in the first one.
Yeah.
You have to find the way to start there. You cannot just come and say, hey, let's go from the one. The relation part is first, then you go to step one. The error that we make the most is assumptions. And when I go to seminary, when I went to seminary, the first thing that Leo told me, hey, you're gonna reconstruct, you're gonna take it down and rebuild everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because, whatever background you have, I don't know, so I'm gonna start from zero.
Right. So it actually, think of it this way: is, it's maybe the other ethnic person that is leading, and he's doing, and you are watching, right? Right. And that's what I mean. It has to go both ways, and I think that way both people can grow together. So it's a one-on-one kind of relationship. Okay, and a multi-Asian model. There's another way of working with reaching other people. On a multi-Asian model, it's working with Asians from different background: Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Hmong, and Filipino, and Asian Indian, and so forth. You kind of see this model developing. There are several hundred multi-Asian churches that have developed in the last 10, 15 years or so. And what this model looks like is, especially like on a college campus, where they might have a fellowship group. They're gathered together, they're on college campus, so they all speak English to some proficiency, and they enjoy their time together because of being Asian. And so they are able to celebrate being Asian. They don't have some of the cultural dynamics that get in the way of things, but they are able to enjoy each other. And so one night they'll go out for Chinese food, next night they'll go out for Thai food, next night they'll go out for yet a different kind of food. And so they enjoy the Asian culture. And so what they do then is, using this as a model, you are gathering Asian people together with English speaking. And this ministry can then develop a future, because they are going to have children who then can be a part of this church or this ministry for the next generation. That next generation then goes from being multi-Asian to multi-ethnic. And so this multi-Asian church will evolve and grow. This multi-Asian church can also reach back to their specific language background, because they will know people. Maybe it's their parents, maybe it's their home country. They can still reach back and have language abilities to reach those other people back in their family, or know of people who can do it. And so by having a focus on this middle group, you can create a strategy to go forward with language and culture as well as backwards. And so that's one model that is being used now and being developed. So when we talk about the multi-Asian, the same thing can apply to other cultures. Hispanic ministry, right? Hispanic ministry is not just Spanish. It's not just Mexican. It's also Peruvian, Colombian, El Salvadorian, Guatemalan, right? So at some point they may be able to have a multi-Hispanic concept as well. So it can work among various groups. Yes?
In our church in Washington, D.C. area, we had Eritreans and Ethiopians. And if you know anything about those, they are at war for thousands of years in Africa. But in America, they worship together. Because that is a common bond that they have, that they can worship in a Lutheran church in America.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? How the gospel does that to people. Okay.
How do you do Chinese New Year with the Lutheran Church?
How do we do Chinese New Year with the Lutheran Church? I don't know. I guess we just celebrate Chinese New Year. If you were a Chinese congregation, you would simply be having the traditional New Year's Day meal kind of thing, and celebrating certain things. So it's all about gathering with family. So churches will do that, and we do the same thing for.
No dragons.
Not necessarily, but we do the same kind of gathering for. Christmas. We have a Christmas dinner. So it's really all about food, right? Okay, so I'm kind of going through this. We're over time already. So I want to plug a couple of things. I mentioned already about the Mission Field USA webinar, so you can look that up. Reaching English-speaking next generation Asian Americans for Christ. And then I gave you the handout about the multi-Asian gathering in conjunction with the multi-ethnic symposium at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. So that's when you register for the multi-ethnic symposium, May 3rd and 4th, it costs $50, but you get to attend the multi-Asian gathering free. Okay, so you come to that, and we'll celebrate that event as well. It's the inaugural launching of the multi-Asian gathering. This is the first time this is happening. And we'll gather people, we'll bring in some leaders, we'll learn about some different Asian cultures, and we'll talk about things like leadership, next generation ministry, ministry opportunities, and the like. So if you can attend, keep this in your prayers. That'd be wonderful. So I need to end it here. Thank you so much for coming and participating. Yes, it's a pleasure. And I send you off with God's blessing. And I think you have my email. I'm not sure what's the best way to get some information to you, but if you're interested, drop me an email and I'll see what we can do in terms of getting you guys information. All right, thank you guys.